Hi, Barrett. It's so good to
Hi,
see
how are you,
you.
Joanna?
Good. I'm doing well. It's been since 2019 conference that we saw each other. So
What have you been
this
up
is
to?
fun. I know it's just been a few short, non-eventful years since our
Yeah,
last conversation.
uh, the
Yeah,
most eventful years of my life, maybe.
truly. I think, yeah,
It
there's
was a great time to be in the conference business, like Yellow,
so
and it was a
wonderful.
great time to be in fashion, um, or not.
Yeah. I think that I'm sure a lot of us could say that they've been some of the most eventful years of our life. And now that we're in this time of kind of coming out of it, it's I'm seeing a lot of new, beautiful things that are almost growing from these seeds that were planted during that time that we
Yeah,
had no
I
idea
agree.
what was going on. But would love to dive in, talk a little bit about yourself, talk a little bit about what you do and the amazing company that you run.
Well, I'll say this first about the pandemic. The best, for me, the thing that was great about it was, I think some people ascribe themselves to be introverts and extroverts, and you know, I'm definitely on the kind of introverted side. And when the pandemic happened, I really was. I'd hired this person to build a playground for my children. Now I love building that kind of stuff, but with the way life is, I have four daughters. I'm married to Rachel here in Nashville, Tennessee. The way life is, you're just too busy to build a swing set. Between friends 3 nights a week, work, birthdays on the weekend, uh, the parents-in-law house on Sunday after church. Life is just too busy, and all of a sudden the pandemic opened it up, and 2 weeks into it, I was like, hold on, I can build this thing, and I've got the time to do it because we got nothing going on, like literally nothing. And but the best thing that I personally got out of it, and I don't know if anybody else feels the same way, but as that kind of introvert label, the amount of energy that I had. So I would come into the office by myself, So the pandemic started. We had 100 employees at Able, and it was brutal at the beginning. We had to furlough 63 people um, because our sales dropped like 90% overnight, basically. But as things settled in and we started we working to get people back and things leveled off, I was still coming into the office by myself because everybody was virtual. But and then I would go home every day, and I would go home with this abundant energy for my children and my spouse that I had never had before, that I didn't even realize that I could have. I just kind of thought life, you're just always tired, right? And then I thought back to the time when I lived in Ethiopia with Rachel, and I was like, oh, that's just kind of what it felt like there too. And it just reminded me, and the pandemic gave us a great language for Rachel and I to say, look, I just can't go back to that where my family gets my last fruits,
Mm,
where everything else gets my attention and my vigor and my passion, and then I get home and I'm exhausted and I have to turn it on and make it happen for my children and then pass out right after they go to bed. And
mhm.
so that's the biggest thing we've been trying to hold on to. Your point of all the things that have come out of the pandemic that have been great. The biggest thing we've been trying to hold on to is how do we maintain the energy for the things that we love the most. And again, that I didn't even realize I had that kind of energy. I just thought life was just tiring.
Mhm.
So anyways, I mean, can you relate to that? Did you go through that at all?
Oh
Are you an
yeah.
extrovert? Like I've got to be doing stuff and being with people.
Well, I'm more of an amnivert, and I'm also a 9 on the Enneagram, and I feel like that relates because I'm all the things. But I really do
Right.
truly feel like I need time with people, but I also need time alone to re-energize. But yeah, the pandemic, man, I think so many of us, myself included, just realized that we were going at unsustainable speeds, that
Right.
we were moving way too fast. And I don't think we even saw it until we had to stop and slow down. I definitely saw that.
Yeah. I mean, the conversation for Rachel and I, because she is wildly extroverted, she's Mrs. Fun all the time. And she's the person that after a party starts to die down and everybody wants to leave, she's the person that's like, hey, this thing can turn back around. I'm going to stick here for a while and see what happens. So having a conversation about, look, it's not that I don't want to do certain things. The problem is I would want to do all of them, but I have to start saying no to things that I really, really want to do, or else, Rose, Marion, Lena, and Howie are going to get, exhausted Barrett. So anyways, yeah. So that's that storyline. But yeah, I worked at a company called Able. My wife and I lived in Ethiopia in 2008, right after we got married, and unintentionally started a fashion company. We were living there, seeing the incredible impact on poverty, and we were seeing how women were forced to make awful and terrible choices in order to support their lives and their children. And one of those was the commercial sex industry. We saw sex slavery, and you started to spend time with these women and realize, because we wanted to get involved through local organizations to see how we could help. And as you hear their stories, you came to understand it wasn't women making bad choices with their lives. It was women making unbelievably heroic choices with their lives, but they would rather have a different opportunity most of the time. And so we were sitting down with a few women, and one of them told her story that she had gone into the commercial sex industry to save her sister from breast cancer. And she said, I would love to have a job with dignity where I could support that. And so we were just kind of like, okay, that does it. The other thing that they said to us was, look, we love charity. We're grateful for what y'all are doing for us. But at the end of the day, once we get out of this time frame of rehabilitation, if we don't have a job on the back end of it, we're going right back to where we were before we met y'all. And that was a real seminal moment of feeling like, okay, we got to do something to provide a sustainable solution for them. So we said, what do you want to do? What would you want to sell or make? And weaving is an ancient practice in Ethiopia. It's been around since the Queen of Sheba, which is a real person. And so these three women started making scarves, and we started selling them. And serendipitously, during that time, scarves were really popular. There was no forecast we read, but scarves were like, there's even
I remember the scarf trend. Oh yeah, I loved my big scarves.
Summer scarves,
yes.
Infinity scarves.
Yeah, I totally remember that.
It was the accessory, thank God, during that time. And it blew up. I mean, Minka Kelly was an actress on Friday Night Lights at the time, and she started talking about it. And then Julianne Hough and Kristen Bell put us in People magazine. And before we knew it, we were forced into being a fashion company, which we honestly had no intention of. We were just trying to schlep a few scarves and create a few jobs.
Wow.
And that was 2010 when we started it.
Okay. Now here we are 12 years later, doing the math. I can do math.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sure.
That doesn't feel real to say 12 years later, but yeah, it is 12 years later. That's true.
Yeah. So you guys were celebrating 10 years right around the pandemic time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right
wow.
before that.
Yeah. So I know that there's probably a lot of stories within the summary that we just got. But when we were at Yellow Conference, I remember you talking about, the thing that I really remember, you were talking about hardships that you had gone through, especially at the beginning few years. I remember you had a slide with you on the ground, and was it animated? Was it an animated slide?
I used
what
my
I'm talking about?
Skills to put Barrett laying down on the bathroom floor.
Yes, I remember that slide. That stuck with me. In my head, he's moving, but I don't know if I'm making that up. But I'd love to talk a little bit about that. What is that? What can you talk a little bit about that slide and what
that time period? Yeah, that was well. So we were, to be really specific, we were a nonprofit when we started and had no intentions of ever becoming a for-profit. But in 2013, our lawyers said, look, you have no leg to stand on. to be a continuing nonprofit status. And largely that was due to two things. Number one, for all the accountants out there, unrelated business income tax. And then secondly, we had set up the manufacturing to be Ethiopian owned and run with intention, but because it was, and they were working with 30 women that had come out of the commercial sex industry by that time. But because we didn't own the manufacturing, we couldn't claim the benefit of it. So all of a sudden we were forced to be a for-profit or quit. And, you know, that for me was a total shock to my system. I had no desire to go into the for-profit space. And I think I also had a mindset of, I mean, you can't do good in the for-profit world. You know, those are bad people. I mean, not that extreme, but the good stuff was done in the nonprofit world was my mindset. But the reality is the first thing I'll say is that decision equipped us to scale far more than we ever would have dreamed and have far more impact than we ever had vision for, number one. But number two, yeah, the point you're talking about is that year was the hardest year of my life. I was so stressed out. I had a 2-year-old and a 8-year-old at the time. And the reason I remember her being 2, a little older than 2, is her waddling into the bathroom while I'm in fetal position, crying my eyes out on the bathroom floor, with mommy saying, "What's wrong with," or her saying to mommy, "What's wrong with Daddy?" That was a tough year. I probably slept 2 hours a night to 3 hours a night. Would just watch Cheers over and over and over throughout the night to try to fall back asleep. And constantly trying to act like I had it together in front of, you know, the few employees we had. And finally, you know, I had a really good friend give me advice. She runs her Gabby Blair, she runs a thing called Mom Design. And we were at a conference and she said, "You look like a mess." And I said, "I am." And she said, "You know, had you ever thought about, you know, trying to take medicine?" And I said, "Yeah, but I'm not crazy though. Like, I don't need medicine, you know, I don't." And she said, "That's not what it is." She's like, it's just, think of it as you've got a broken leg right now and you need to put a cast on. And so what's crazy is I started taking Lexapro. And I talk about that openly because I just need for people not to believe a facade of how Abel's growth has just been a really easy thing for the team or me. But yeah, within a couple of weeks, I felt like myself again. And I started having creative thoughts again. I started having my energy back to be a parent. And so that time period really required that I find a solution outside of what I felt was within my own strength. And it was huge. And I was able to kind of develop my mental and emotional muscles back over that time period with that cast on. Is that what you remember from the conversation?
Yeah.
And that's like, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I know. I mean, I can't, putting myself in your shoes, thinking about this business that is growing really quickly. You have young children. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old right now. And I know,
So you know what it's
that
all about.
alone is a lot, especially, I mean, my son just turned 3 and the attitude has been like turned up to 11. The teenagers are so real. But just all of that, the not being able to sleep, I just, yeah,
It was
that's
an
so
insane
much.
year,
Yeah,
it's
that's
so
so
much.
much.
Yeah.
So with the medication, alongside that, was there anything else that helped you move into that more creative place? Like you mentioned, you started having creative ideas again, and which is so important, you know, as a leader and a vision caster of this company that you're running. But it can often be really hard because there's so many things that are on your mind and stunts that creative flow. But was there anything else that kind of helped you move into that space, having that free flow and creativity coming back?
You know, therapy, we'll go through a list. So I do think that that was the first crutch I needed, and some people need to stay on that crutch permanently, and some people don't. Um, you know, my real commitment to myself once I got myself back was, I don't I don't want life or circumstances. I should say, I don't want circumstances like my business to drive me that hard into the ground again, and I don't ever want that again. Like it just shouldn't. But somehow I just wasn't prepared for what was somewhat forced upon me, was to take on this for profit. And I was in my 40s, I was in my young 40s, and it just felt like I just felt this huge imposter syndrome and all this kind of stuff. So what I would say is probably the most important decision I made during that time, alongside that, was getting a mentor that really understood what I was going through. um, I had read in an article that people look at entrepreneurs and think, look how brave they are riding that lion. And entrepreneurs are thinking, how the hell did I get on this lion, and how do I stop it from killing me? And
Mm,
that's definitely how I felt at the time.
mm,
But I had a mentor, Corey, that was just right there for me, super solid, all the time available, for frankly, endlessly available to me,
mm,
to a point that it wasn't just like a bi-weekly kind of check-in on how's my P&L look, but really someone that was like, how are you doing?
mm.
And even could do this, could even say, Barrett, that thought, I got to tell you, that is legitimately crazy. You're thinking that this is going to all fall apart overnight because of one
Mm,
bad day of sales, and that's wrong, that's not going to happen, here's the way you need to think about it. And other times go, nope, that's right, you're afraid for a reason. Now let's think about how to get that into perspective. Let's think about how to put that on Maslow's hierarchy of emotional needs, and let's try to put it in perspective. And I needed that. I needed what was clearly, um, I clearly needed emotional coaching, and how to, just frankly put things in perspective was really not something I had naturally done well at that point in my life.
Well, that's the power of community and talking to people, is what I hear you
That's right.
saying. That
That's right.
people, this is what we do in guidance groups too with Yellow, is you speak something, you speak a challenge, and then you can hear from other people their thoughts on that, how they see that, what they think is a good move or a question to ask. And it's just so helpful to get outside perspective, um because we can be so in our heads spinning in
So in
that
our heads, and
wheel.
even to just know what you've gone through before somebody else does to you. Like,
Yeah.
the cliche statement that's a cliche for a reason is, you're not alone in this, and you're not the only person that's gone through this, um, is leveling if you can receive it. And finding someone that's empathetic enough to be able to kind of say, no, this very specific emotion I've had, here's how I can relate to it, here's how I've been through it. I
Mhm.
think that was the hardest part, is I left myself in a category for a year of thinking, man, no one has ever been through what I'm going through, or
Mhm.
no one understands me. And it just wasn't true. I'd created a pretty dark hole that wasn't a reality.
Mm, mm. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think we can, it's a shared experience that we all have, that thinking our experience is not shared. It's so easy to do, and there's
Well
so much
said.
power in someone else saying, "Oh, I've been there. I know the exact feeling that you're feeling." And that's always what it is, right? We always think this is going to be so shocking, like no one is going to understand, and then we
No
say
one's
the
going to
thing and it's
understand.
every time met with, "Oh, I've been like I get it." Or if I haven't
Yeah.
been there, I can understand, or I have, I know someone who has, or it's just always that. So I think that's so important. Yeah, to have in our lives those people that we can get that outside perspective from.
Love it. I agree.
So one thing that we talk about a lot on this podcast is how creating meaningful work, how our work, how really also entrepreneurship can reveal so much about ourselves and how it can really be a portal to self-discovery. And what, I'm hearing in your story is a lot of that. You dove into this, unintentionally dove into this business, all this stuff was coming at you, and then you're dealt with, or you're met and faced with yourself and these things you're telling yourself and all of this stuff. So how do you see, besides what you've already shared, how do you see your work as the founder of this company being a portal to self-discovery for you?
It's a great question. If I was to continue on past that point where I started feeling like I was getting myself back, I kind of mentioned before that I really wanted to spend that time redeveloping my mental and emotional muscles so that if something like that came at me again, that I'd be able to handle it. And, after a couple of years of going through that, prioritizing family, spending time in the right places, um, prioritizing relationships, and then, putting work in its appropriate place, I came off of Lexapro and, and, it was pretty seamless. I was able to come off of it, but if I would have had to gone back to it, I would have been totally fine with that as well. But I think the pandemic was really the first big test for me. We business fell apart, and I had a couple weeks, where Rachel will testify that I looked similar to 2014. And I started considering, do I need to go back to that place? But I just wanted to give it a little bit of time to see, has this journey worked for me to the goal of being able to handle something like this again? How do I actually learn to put it in its appropriate bucket? That no matter what, if this thing totally fell apart, I do have people, and there is privilege in that I have people that will be able to take care of me. If everything else fell apart, that my family will still love me. If this business fell apart, am I still going to be able to fill in the blank, right? And I was able to do that. I was able to put it back on those questions to drive genuine peace into my heart. Whereas, years earlier in 2014, I wasn't able to. I could ask those same questions, but I would land on, yes, this is all going to fall apart, so that journey of stress, while there's no way during that time I would have said that I was thankful for it, oh gosh, it's just so painful to say, but true to say, that I'm a better husband, leader, and parent for it. And if you would have told me I would have had to gone through it in order to get to that journey, I would have said, aren't there a couple of books I can read to get me there? If you would have shown me that crystal ball, and I don't think there's any way I would have started Able if I would have had the crystal ball to show me what was coming. But I guess that's just the way it goes, right?
Yeah, that's so true. It's like, as much as we want to, and even our culture tells us we can fast forward our growth, or there's a hack to it all. There's a hack to the
Right.
self-discovery. I mean, there's no hack. You got to go through the stuff
You got to
sometimes.
go through it.
Oh, and it sucks.
It
It
sucks.
really does. But wow. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit here, and I want to have time here to talk about the disruption that your company is causing in the fashion industry, because y'all are doing some really radical things with transparency and pricing, with helping others. You just came out with a guide for inclusive sizing, and you all are just doing some really radical things. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what you guys are doing at Able and how you are bringing transparency to the fashion world.
Well, it is foundational from even that time period in 2014. I think we keep going back to that storyline, but there's a quote by Helen Keller that says, oh boy, I'm about to butcher it, but it talks about being fully outright exposed versus covering yourself up in protection is no more safe, by trying to hide behind things. So you might as well just let it all out. And you know what would be great is if you actually put that quote somewhere, where people can read it, or Google it, people. It's actually really good.
We'll put it in the show
Um,
notes.
Show notes. So, the point of it is outright exposure is no more safe, or no more dangerous. And so I feel like as a brand, we've kind of lived into that space that says, look, we don't want to put into the world that you have to be perfect before you're honest. It just makes everybody else feel more alone, to the point of our other conversation. The reality is we're all on a journey to figure this out. And one of those big journeys for us early on was coming to understand as we were in the fashion space, that the fashion space is a massive perpetrator of sustainability issues, as well as, women around the world that make product having to work 2 jobs, 60, 70 hours a week to make ends meet, and nobody earning a living wage. Only 2% of women that made product around the world in the fashion space earned a living wage.
Oh.
So that means you can't make ends meet. And that's completely ridiculous. And so we looked at that and said, well, what are we going to do about that? So we're starting to have some influence in the space. We're trying to get everybody in our own supply chain to a living wage. We have that in our national offices. We had gotten there with all of our Ethiopian partners and manufacturers, but there were still places around the world where we weren't all the way to a living wage. And so I remember telling my PR agent, I said, or Abel's PR agent, I should say, we're thinking about starting to publish our lowest wages. And he said, why would you want to do that? And I said, well, we feel like if we can publish our lowest wages, not our average wages, but our very lowest wages in every manufacturer, that protects everybody else up above that in that manufacturer. If you know the bottom, then you know where the floor is. And then we also want to educate consumers so that they can start demanding the same of other brands, because there's going to be some shame in having, for some of us, for some brands to have to say, okay, here's what our lowest wage is. But then consumer demand forces brands to get things right. It's like when child labor was exposed in 1996 through a little boy sewing a Nike football together. I'll never forget how Nike tried to deny it, say it's not our fault, we don't own the manufacturing. Quickly, consumers said, this is your fault, do something about it. And then shareholder value dropped, and boy, they did something about it really fast. So we were trying to create the same kind of movement. And frankly, right when the pandemic was coming together, we've done the lowest wage challenge. Things were really starting to come together for that. But we had to put pause on it during the pandemic while businesses were just trying to stay afloat. And a lot of people didn't. But that is something we're trying to work towards now. As you kind of pointed out, we're coming out of that phase. We can start re-educating consumers and putting their minds on it, because I do think we live in a much softer world after the pandemic. People had the space and time to start thinking about why behind every choice that they made. And so anyways, that's kind of the mentality, is let's believe in progress over perfection, that we can let our consumers know this, not be afraid, regardless of that PR agent was telling you about saying, what the hell are you thinking? This is not a good decision. But for us, it was kind of a burn the ships decision, and that's where we landed with it. Transparency. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love what you said, that we don't have to wait till we're perfect to be honest. And that, I remember you saying at the conference, that one stood out. And that quote comes up even in our community from you, and you saying it here reminded me of it. And I think that's so important for us to remember, that we don't have to be perfect before we are honest, because just in general in our culture right now, I think there's a lot of fear around honesty, and just, what if we say something wrong? What if, I'm offending someone and I don't even know? And so it takes, I think I think especially today, it takes an extra bit of vulnerability to be honest, because we are more educated. People do know more and, have opinions. And um, so, yeah,
Yeah, and I would even say that like try the alternative of trying to have it all together before you're honest is also just impossibly untrue. But it's not real. But we kind of feel like we have to get it together before we can talk about what's not going right.
hmm
Uh, and frankly, we just didn't want to run our brand that way either. We wanted to run a company where both externally and internally we could live into that core value. And so it's led to some risky decisions like that, or what others would think are risky decisions. But frankly, consumers have been embraced it and said, "Hey, thanks for being honest about what we knew was kind of underneath the belly, and everybody else PR spends like crazy."
mm
I mean, I'll never forget watching the commercial that said that, and I'm not going to get it right, but it said that the smoking industry spent 10, or Philip Morris or somebody like that had spent $10 million talking about all the good they were doing for children's awareness in smoking, but they'd only spent $1 million on children awareness in smoking. It was some kind of a statistic like that. And
mm.
it's just that it's just such a cultural thing that we don't even realize we're absorbing, that says put more effort into making it look good or sound good than you actually put in the effort to make it good. You know?
Yes, that is so true. Yeah. And even this idea of perfection and waiting to be perfect, I mean, perfection really doesn't even exist, because we would all have
Right.
our own definitions of what that is. Perfect to you would be different than perfect to me, to, someone else, people with different experiences. And um, so if we wait for this thing that's actually not even real, then we'll never be able to be honest. And yeah, there is so much effort that goes into the look of everything. I didn't know that about Philip Morris, but I could totally see it.
And I might have got that wrong. It was some cigarette company. Disclaimer asterisk and dollar amounts asterisk, but just the point that they spent more money on the PR than they did the actual impact they were trying to have.
Yeah, that's wild. Well, what y'all are doing at Able is wonderful. Love your clothes. I should have worn Able today. I'm not right now, but I do have a number of staple Able
A
items
lot
in
of
my
cute stuff coming
closet,
out.
as well as shoes, which I always get compliments on my Able shoes that I
Oh,
wear.
good.
Yeah. Well, Barrett, is there anything else, any bit of advice or any last words that you'd like to give someone who is stepping out, wanting to create meaningful work, or is on the journey of creating meaningful work? And yeah, what would you say to them?
You know, it's this kind of entire conversation we've had around this thought about getting a mentor, about getting vulnerable with someone, and just listening well to those that have been down this road. Um, I think, I also suffered early on from thinking, "Hey, I can do this," and the irony of it is looking at people that have been through it before and talking about the hard things they run into, and said, "Oh, but I'm different," you know.
Mhm.
I mean, ridiculous. That same "I'm different" also then carried over into, "Oh, their problems are different from mine," right? It's just this thing of almost a narcissistic human tendency. But just really lean in to listen to people and get advice on everything from what you might run into as an entrepreneur, first and foremost, and then also just whatever you're starting to do, really get believe in what you're doing, but also be willing to hear from people that your value proposition may be off. What you think is so attractive about it may not be, but let them help you refine that vision, because there's a core there and a nugget that you should believe in, but help people, or let people help you knock the edges off of it. Just be a great listener. That is my best advice.
That's so good. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Barrett. It's been so good
Likewise.
reconnecting with you and seeing your face and
Likewise.
hearing your story. So appreciate you. And yeah,
It's my
hopefully
pleasure.
we'll be able to do some fun stuff in the future as
Some
well.
conferencing.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Barrett.
Thanks, Joanna. Have a good day.